In this video, I will be telling you about how I got a 36 on my ACT and giving you a framework that will hopefully allow you to get a 36 on your ACT or as high a score as you possibly can get. So first, I should disclaimer that I did have some tutoring, but really the only thing that my tutoring sessions just consisted of, I did a practice test and then I'd come to a tutor session, so either be math and science or English and reading, and I would go over the test with them, or I basically, they'd grade it, so it'd be like, they'd tell me all the answers, I'd say which ones I got wrong, and then we would go over them, which is helpful, but is not critical. Like, I could have definitely done it on my own. I mean, it helps that, and also, I guess they gave me the bank of tests, but I just searched up bank of past ACT tests, and was in like the top 2 searches or whatever, or top 2, websites, was one that had like 8 different, past ACT tests. So hopefully that shouldn't really affect my advice. I structured it so that you can definitely do it all by yourself. It just, the only basically thing about tutoring is that it just helps give you a little bit more framework, so you don't have to really worry about finding all the tests, and about they can kind of give you the advice, you don't have to go searching for it. But honestly, I think the extra effort of searching for it, and when I did it on my own, because I wasn't satisfied with their answers, or they didn't have a good enough answer for me to really understand it, I found that I understood the concept better. So hopefully with the extra effort, if you get a question wrong, you just search it up and figure out why, especially on like the math section, then that should help you. And also for the start of this video, I recommend that you give yourself about 3 months, maybe 2-3 months, maybe a little bit more. I give myself, for my first test, maybe 3-4 months, because I had my test, my first ACT, in the beginning of October, and September around then, and I started studying at the beginning of summer, so it kind of worked out that way. But give yourself a couple months, because just to optimize your chances. And but if you're not, and you're watching this video the night before, I do have some advice for you. So I just go down to the part of this video that says night before, and hopefully you can get some advice that will just maybe give you an extra little boost. And also, I like to apologize for the not the best video quality. Hopefully my advice, hopefully it's good enough that it kind of levels out with the video quality. So to start out, the first steps you should be doing are basically, you could take an optional first ACT practice test, right? So that would be just like to gauge where you are. Like, I did this, and I found it kind of helpful. I don't know, I mean, it's not really needed. Basically all it just tells you is like where you're going to start at, so you can kind of gauge it to see your progress. If you want to, but if you're going to take a gauge test, basically you should take the full test and do it under the time requirements, and so the proper break times, the proper everything, and then probably also set it in the morning, because all the ACT tests are basically in the morning. So I wouldn't do it at like 3 in the afternoon or something like that, because I just don't think that'd be realistic, because you're just trying to give yourself just start to get yourself acclimated to the specific conditions of the ACT. And then once you've done a gauge test, once you figure out where you are, or if you don't, that's fine, it doesn't really affect it too much, I don't think. But once you've done that, then I would recommend, before you can just start focusing on practicing the test, is to spend like maybe a week, maybe, it depends on how much time you have. If you're doing it, it depends, but spend a little bit of time, maybe like 10% of your whole study time, on just content review. So at the start, I recommend for math, going over so if you search up the Organic Chemistry Tutor, the YouTube channel Organic Chemistry Tutor, he has a lot of good ACT review videos on the math section, so where he goes over all the different types of problems. I would watch those in depth, and just maybe take notes on them, and just make sure you understand as much as you can about those the different types of problems he goes through. And then also I'll put it probably in the description, but I found a good website that goes through all of the English grammar rules and punctuation rules that you would see on the ACT, and I had like a bank of these, and it was so like, you know, valuable. Especially like I would just review it all the time, you know, before I took a test, or before I took my real test in the morning. I look through them to make sure I remembered all these rules, because like they just save you so much time, because you know the rule, you go through, you see the problem, you're like, oh, this is a apostrophe rule, or this is, you know, colon, I need to put a colon here, or this is, you know, a specific place where the comma goes, or, you know, it just saves you so much time and so much effort. And yeah, so I'd spend some time doing those, and then also I'd watch, go to Super Tutor TV, that's a YouTube channel, and just search up their, you know, they're like, it's like, I think like hack videos, like science, you know, hacks for the science ACT section and reading ACT section, because a lot of those are just like, they're all like logic based, like, you know, you read a passage and then you have to write some, you know, or you have to answer questions about it. And so there's a lot of like small little tips that I got through tutoring, but also I watched a lot of those videos and I found them really helpful. They basically covered the same things as my tutors covered, actually, and some of them were better than what the advice my tutors gave. But I'd watch those. So then you just gotta get a general idea for what you should be, you know, focusing on when you're in each section. Then once you've done that, then that will get into practice. So now that you have gone through all of the different, you know, like grammar stuff for the English section, all the different math, you know, types of questions for the math section, and then you've gone through the logic and or like the different like rules and stuff you should be following, or like, you know, just like guidelines for the reading and science, then you should move on to practice. Okay, so now that you're practicing, I have some recommendations for how you should structure your practice. So I found that the best way is so maybe after you've done the content review, you take another Gauge full simulated practice test. And I definitely would recommend, just even if you didn't take a Gauge one before, I would do it now, because now you've kind of just got a lot of the initial content review, and you probably would still go through some content review every once in a while. Just, you know, if there's sometimes problems that you're feeling that you're always, you know, missing on your test, on your practice, then I would definitely just review those, you know, just spend a little, you know, maybe a day or two just going through content instead of doing practice. But so basically how I structured it and how I think would be best for your purposes for studying for the ACT would be to so take a full, you know, start with a full ACT, and, you know, simulate it as best you can. So, you know, simulate what you would do the night before, and then, you know, wake up and have it, you know, around, if you know what time your ACT is at, then I would just do that, because then it's going to give you like a habit and routine. So also put out everything you're going to put out for your ACT, you know, so that might be a calculator, pencil, you know, if you're bringing a bag or something like that, just put out everything. So you just, you know, build this habit, you know, through all your practice tests. So then, you know, the night before, then it just feels a lot, you know, all your nerves are gone, and so it makes it a lot easier to focus on your real tests. Because that's something I didn't do, and I realized after I took my first one, and then I took my second one, and that's when I got my 36, was that, you know, the second one I feel so much more calm with, so it was so much easier to actually get through the test. And that's also a lot of it. It's a long test, so you need the stamina, and you can get that through, you know, lowering your nerves before, you know, because you're not so nervous because you've done this, you know, a lot of times. But so you take a real, you know, simulate, you know, a real test by taking a full test and doing all the, you know, night before stuff in the morning, and, you know, all the time restrictions. But then after that real test, then you're probably, and you're, you know, obviously graded, and, you know, and then you want to, after you you know, take the test, you want to grade it, and I'll talk about grading in the next section. But, you know, you're just grading, you're analyzing, you're looking at mistakes, but then you're going to instead of taking another real test, you're gonna just do sections, because this makes it a lot more manageable, since you're probably if you're doing this during school year, it's a lot more manageable than trying to find, you know, what is it, 3-4 hours, or if you're extended time, like 6 hours to take a test. There's no way, right? Well, obviously you can't unless you're doing weekends, so it's also hard, because then you're taking half your day, and then you always feel drained afterwards. So yeah, it's hard. So yeah, so what I did is I did sections. So you'd be like, I took a math section maybe one day, and then, you know, and then I take a science section the next day, and then I take maybe English section the next day, and then a reading section. So, or, you know, I take math and science one day, and then reading and English one day. So, you know, you're splitting it up, and you're just focusing, and also I recommend not just taking them all like, and then grading. So not taking like math, then taking science, then taking reading, then English, then grading them. Is, you know, take a math, then grade the math, then, you know, make sure you understand what you got wrong, and then, you know, reevaluate, and then take the science, or, you know, take math and science, because they're kind of linked a little bit, not really, but kind of. That's how I link them though, is, take math and science and then grade the math and science and analyze those and understand them, and then take English for me. Because then if I find when I didn't do that, it made a lot harder to like, think about, well, what was I doing? Because I've already taken, two other, and I'd taken two other different sections. It's a lot harder to remember what my thought process was. So then it was a lot harder to correct my logic, so then make that stick for the next time. Yeah, that's how basically, if you just structure your practice like that, it should be good. And then also a general piece of advice for when you're taking tests, and even on the real test, I did this on both my real tests I did, was just feel free to skip questions. It's not that, like, skip questions, I mean, try to come back to them. If you can't, obviously you can't, but yeah, on every section, reading, English, math, science, if you just don't know and you're spending a lot of time, just skip it. Just, it's not that big a deal, because you're just graded on how many you can get right, not on what you get wrong, right? Or skip it, but also just put something down, because you're not going to have time to come back and fill in the bubble later. So just put down what your best guess is and then move on. Because honestly, I did that a couple times, and on my practice test I realized, oh my gosh, I got like 3 of my guesses right. Because sometimes it's like you think you're right but you don't know, and also the nerves are kicking in. So yeah, that's my general recommendation for taking practice tests. Grading is the most important step, in my opinion, of this whole process, because if you don't grade properly, then you're not going to get really many benefits from doing it. You're not going to get as many benefits as you could from taking other practice tests. Like this is where basically I did this all on myself. I didn't do, the tutors, they kind of went through it, but then like, okay, cool. And then, like if their session was, usually our session would be over, and then, I didn't get through, like half of my questions that I had, or they just gave me some unsatisfactory answers, so then I had to do a lot of this on my own, and it really helps. So yeah, I think it's really important that you just really focus for grading, and even though it might be hard at times, just you gotta give it a lot of effort, because it will definitely pay off. For the English section, I recommend that if you get a question wrong, you first of all look at it. If it's a silly mistake, then just recognize they might just have to slow down, or just like during my test, I just start breathing, like take some deep breaths. It sounds weird, maybe people will start looking at you, but whatever. If you get a good score, you get a good score. But yeah, so if it's a silly mistake, maybe just slow down for a second, or just take some deep breaths while you're in the reading section or English, whatever section it is. And then, but for English specifically, since it's all about grammar and punctuation rules, a lot of my errors would be, I forgot this grammar rule, I forgot this part about this punctuation rule. So then I would take whatever punctuation rule is, and then I'd write it down on like a post-it note. And then before I take my next practice section of that test, or if it was before I took my next practice section of the English, then I'd review through all the other grammar rules or punctuation rules that I forgot, or that I wasn't really, I was a little bit shaky on, or I look at I search up examples and I write those down on post-it notes and then look at those. But just to get your mind familiar with what type of things, or I'd write that specific question down and put it on a post-it note, and then I look at that, just so you get more comfortable with the types of ways that the ACT will like try to test you on this. And then for math, for math, since it's split up into basically 3 different types of difficulties. So questions 1 through 30 are considered the easier questions, and some of them, they're usually easy. Some of them I've found some challenges with, and if you don't remember the concept, and I can remember the concept, and it's kind of like, oh, that's you sometimes you forget. But yeah, these are supposed to be the easier questions. Then 31 through 50 are like the medium-ish questions, but once you get to 40 to 50, it's kind of like ramping up. And then 51 through 60 are like the hard questions. Like these are like, some of these can be like insanely hard. Like how am I gonna finish this in time? Hard. So just look at what section your question is in, and then you can just search that up on YouTube, or if it's a concept, then search up that concept and Then again, write it down on a post-it note, then review that before you take the next math section so that you get more familiar, or even write the question down so you get more familiar, or do some other practice, or just, look up practice on whatever it's, if it's permutations, if it's, I don't know, some type of area calculation, or if some type of statistics calculation, whatever it is. Or any type of math concept, then search it out, search some practice questions on it, and then before you take your next math section, then do those practice questions, and trust me, it will help, especially for the math section. That was the section I struggled the most on, a little bit, just because I forgot a lot of the concepts, and there's a lot of concepts. So if you really can hammer those down every time you figure out it's a weak spot, and you hammer that down right away, because that's why I didn't do that at the start, and so I'd have to constantly spend time later, and I keep on getting this question wrong, and I just didn't hammer it down until later, and I was like, if I would just done this the first time I saw it, then it would have saved me so much time. So if you do that for the math, especially for math and English, since it's basically all just remembering all the concepts and applying them, then it'll make taking the real test a lot easier. And then for reading and science, basically they're all logical reasoning. Some of my mistakes would be silly mistakes. If it's a silly mistake, again, just focus on maybe calming down, or before you take that section, or while you're in the section, just take maybe a second or two just to take a breath and then clear your mind, because I find that helps. Or find a better way to pace yourself, and then or just work on your technique maybe. So to maybe avoid the silly mistake, or if it's I saw this question and I thought this was a good answer, but then I didn't realize that maybe I had a better answer right over here, whatever. So then work on whatever your technique. So for reading, I would basically read all the sections, kind of read, skim. But one of the things I found helpful was a lot of the reading, or even the science, I think they have it on a specific line or a specific point. So for reading, as I'm reading it, or before I look through the questions. Even for science, I look through the questions and mark in my head, or even on the paper, what I'm looking for in the reading. And I found that really helpful, because then there's certain things that you're already looking for. Because some of them are just basic, encapsulating the whole thing, what's the theme of this passage, or what is blah blah blah. For I don't know. Basically, they're capturing the whole the whole passage. So that's something it's hard to really write down, but usually you can get it just from reading it and paying attention while you're reading. And then but for things about specific points or specific lines, I just write those down. And then if I see that, then I'm okay, I go once I got to that point, once I got to that line, I go straight to that question, answer it, because then you know it right away, or you know it a lot better. You have a lot higher probability of getting that question right. And for reading, I didn't find this a problem, because but some of my friends found it's a problem. They got bored when they were reading, because they just found that the reading is boring, and some of them are boring. But I don't know, I just found it I just was focused on what finding the enjoyment in reading these different things, because some of them are actually pretty cool. I remember reading this passage in the ACT about these how primitive humans were able to colonize Polynesian islands, and how they basically and also talked about, and then it connected in so they were using connected in plants, and how they were able to how the seeds got into the islands, but also how the people basically they used canoes and sailed across, or canoed across the ocean to these islands. And I found that interesting, but some of them are pretty boring. So just also find ways to get yourself excited about reading, because it makes it a lot more easy, or it makes it a lot easier to focus and find the specific points that you're looking for when you're more engaged in the reading. If you're struggling with finishing the math, reading, science, or English sections, then I have some advice. So I would recommend splitting each of the sections up by their passages. So basically by the passages actually, and then you can use for the English section, they have I think it's 5 passages, 6 passages. So each passage, you take the total time for English section, then say you have 5 passages, then you divide that by how many passages you have. So Or for the science section, usually there's 6 passages. You get 35 minutes to do the science section. So usually that would amount to about 5 minutes and 48 seconds for each passage. So then while I'm taking for the science section, for instance, I would, while I'm doing the passage, I would time myself, and then I would look back at the end of the passage and see, am I 5 minutes, 40 seconds? Am I too fast? Am I too slow? And I wouldn't then stop and be like, what, analyze that, because maybe you're too slow on one section, but then you make it up on another section, right? And especially on on the science section, there's a section called the dueling scientist, which is usually it's almost always the hardest section, almost always the hardest passage in the science section. So, you might take 30 seconds, a minute extra on that, but you make it up through all. So, be a little bit lenient, but just make sure you're staying around that. Or if you notice one of the beginning sections, you take 7 minutes instead of 5 minutes and 48 seconds, or 8 minutes, or you're taking 3 minutes, and be like, well, and then you look and you see you got a couple questions wrong, or you got them all right, but then you don't have enough time to finish. Then say, okay, I need to slow down. And if I'm going too fast, I need to slow down on the beginning, or I need to slow down in the middle, or I need to slow down at the end, whatever it is. But it just helps you get more, it helps you see, where you kind of your weak spots are, or where you're speeding up, where you're slowing down. It kind of gives you a more accurate representation of how you're taking the test. But yeah, don't stop though. Don't stop between each passage, because then I find, unless you are you just don't have much time that day and you have to split it up, then it's fine. Split it up by passage. Maybe do the first 3 passages, and then do the rest of the passages later. But I would try not to, because then it kind of defeats the purpose. Because you need at least some longevity in the sense that you can't just be the practice is partly the practice of doing a section is it also gives you a little bit of strain in your endurance with the test. So unless you really have to, I would try not to split up by passage. And then for the math, since there's no actual passages, it's just 60 questions. And so I would recommend splitting it up by the sections I talked about in the grading your test, which is 1 through 30, 31 through 50, and then 51 through 60. Because usually they should take around the same time, which kind of seems crazy that 10 questions would take around the same time as 30 questions, but trust me, it does. Yeah. So I'll try to split them up. Sometimes I can speed through the 30 questions, or sometimes usually I take a little bit longer on the 30 questions, because I just found that it just took me longer. So it just depends. But so again, don't stop unless you really have to between the symbolic passages in the math section. But yeah, that's how I recommend splitting it up. I can't remember how much time exactly. I think it's an hour, right? An hour for math. So you would split that up into, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. So around then, basically. Now we reached the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed, found the advice helpful. I tried to give you as much, a framework as I could on what I did and what, I found was helpful for me and other people I talked to. So hopefully you found it helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and goodbye.